everybody, and welcome to the Feminine Principle Podcast, Astrology for Authentic Living. My name is Mel with Energetic Principles.
And I'm Shawna with Neo Feminine Astrology.
And in this episode, we will be discussing the astrology for the week of October 23rd, 2017, and what we have titled Daring Greatly. The purpose of this podcast is to give inspiration and guidance for this week with real-life examples of what to expect.
The three major aspects that we'll talk about today are Mercury in Scorpio, trine Neptune in Pisces, which we're calling charmed communications. We'll also speak about the sun moving into Scorpio and conjunct Jupiter, which is all about your greatest potential. And we'll also talk about Mercury in Scorpio, sextile Pluto, and Venus in Libra squaring Pluto, which is all about discovering deep connections. So please remember that some of these aspects will influence you more than others based on what's actually happening in your life and your personal astrological makeup. Notice what resonates with you most and always use your intuition and logic to decide what's best for you.
Yes, because you know you best. So yeah, Shawna, let's kick off this week's episode with a quick rundown of the moon's path through the zodiac and some other minor aspects. Excuse me. For all you astro geeks out there. So our lunar lady is going to kick off the week in the big picture sign of Sagittarius as she moves through her waxing cycle. On Tuesday, which is Wednesday for some, she's going to move into the authoritative sign of Capricorn, where she'll remain until moving into future-oriented Aquarius on Friday, when we have our first quarter moon, which we'll talk about more on that later in the episode. So Shawna, share with us our featured author for the week.
So this is one of my faves. This week's episode features quotes and inspiration from Brainy Brown. Brainy Brown is a researcher and psychotherapist, and she researches shame and vulnerability specifically. And particularly, she looks at how it is that we can have resilience to shame and how vulnerability and empathy are actually the qualities that support our ability to dare greatly. So we'll use quotes from two of her different books. One is I Thought It Was Just Me, but it isn't. And then the other one is Daring Greatly. So very excited to share that with everyone. Important stuff for this week.
Yes. And I took a look at her chart real quick, and we'll have to talk about it later, but talk about Pluto. Perfect Pluto representative this week. So yeah.
Yeah, she's a fascinating person, a very Plutonian person. So we're excited to jump into these transits with everyone. And one last note before we do, I want to give a shout out to our newest patron, Corinne or Corin. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. We appreciate you.
Yes,
So if you want to be cool like her, you can get the show notes that we offer every week by becoming a patron of the podcast. So the show notes, you get all of the specific dates for the transits that we talk about. You also get the quotes and the tarot cards that Mel pulls. You get a copy with a list of all of those things and the reflection questions, which is super helpful. So to become a patron, to get that, you can find out more on our Facebook page or Instagram under Feminine Principle Podcast. Or you can also find out more and actually sign up at feminineprinciplepodcast.podbean.com.
So, and we have another exciting announcement, right, Shawna? We've decided to go FB live again because it went so well last time. And, what better way to go live than on a full moon? So we're going to be back on, November 3rd, which is our full moon in Taurus. So you can find us on Facebook live at 12:30 p.m. And like Shawna was just saying that we're at Feminine Principle Podcast. And if you want to see our previous Facebook live session, we do have that pinned to the top of our Facebook right now. So you can learn a little about Shawna and I and how we got into astrology and, our astrological pet peeves and some other fun questions we ask each other. So yeah, come on down and check that out. Cause we're going to be available once again for some live Q&A, especially during this full moon, right, Shawna?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was so great to connect with everyone during the last Facebook Live. And I know that a lot of people had questions. And so, it's really cool. So yeah, bring your questions if you just want to hang out with us and say hi, on the full moon. It will be a full moon in Taurus. And so that is, Friday, November 3rd. It's at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. Which is 7:30 p.m. Universal time. And then over, in Australia, it's, November 4th, which is Saturday at 5:30 a.m. Australian Eastern time. So if you all are up early, you can grab some coffee and hang out with us too.
Or if you haven't gone to bed yet, come on down and hang out with us. However you find yourself, at that time. But yeah, we'd love to see and hear you and see what you got to say for this full moon, because we're ready to connect with our listeners. So we hope to see you there. So that all being said, let's jump into these transits that we have this week. And there is we will be daring greatly this week, as there are some things up on the roster, planetary wise. So let's kick this off with our first aspect we have here, and that is Mercury in Scorpio, who's going to be in a trine aspect to Neptune in Pisces, and what we are calling charmed communications. And just for some exacts here, Mercury is going to trine Neptune on Tuesday, October 24th at 8:56 a.m. Pacific time, which is 3:56 p.m. Universal time, and Wednesday, October 25th at 1:56 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that trine is going to happen at 11 degrees Scorpio in Pisces. So Shawna, kick us in with your first quote.
So this first quote is from the book called I Thought It Was Just Me, but It Isn't, Making the Journey from What Will People Think to I Am Enough. And so she says, in the growing body of empathy research, we are finding that successful leaders often demonstrate high levels of empathy, that empathy is related to academic and professional success, that it can reduce aggression and prejudice and increase altruism. Studies also show that it's a vital component of successful marriages. The bottom line is that empathy is essential for building meaningful, trusting relationships, which is something we all want and need. And so I thought this was so perfect for Mercury in Scorpio trining Neptune, because Mercury is how we communicate. It's how we speak to one another. It's the thoughts that we have in our head as well. And when Mercury is in Scorpio, it's really like contemplating these things around empathy and deep feelings and what it is that we feel underneath the words that we're saying. What is the feeling as we communicate? And when this comes into contact with Neptune, there's an enhanced capacity for empathy and for compassion and for really having meaningful communication that goes deeper than just surface level contact, and that actually can be very healing.
Yes. You know, there's so much that could be said with Mercury in Scorpio trining Neptune in Pisces. And I think the empathy direction is a great one, because, you know, Scorpio's got that healing energy. It can see within and without in a sense. So it can pick up on these slight signals, because that's the thing, is the key to having functioning empathy is that you have to be able to see the underlying motive, especially coming out of another person, and when to act from a caring and healing place, or really understanding when someone might need that empathy from you, or being able to recognize that, or especially even for yourself, to being empathetic to your own self, which is just as important as being so for another person. So I feel like this trine, that aspect can definitely come up to play since we're talking about Scorpio. It is interesting too, Shawna, because we have, when this, aspect is, exact, we're going to have the moon in the late degrees of Sagittarius, who's just crossed over Saturn, and is also in a square with Chiron. So I find that interesting, Chiron being, usually a pain trigger in some way or something that is, brought up, to make us, uncomfortable so we can move through something that essentially is our, an inner wound of ours, more proverbially speaking. So something could come up right now that, you do have to tap into, that empathetic, energy for yourself or for another person, based on, something that causes pain. But ultimately, it's a harmonious connection, right, Shawna? It's a potential for growth. So how can we put these two things together? That Mercury, thought, communication, and perception function with, Neptune, who's asking us to be more sensitive, more intuitive, compassionate, and just, honor, what it is that we envision in our dreams. And especially that tie into Sagittarius, and Saturn there and the moon being there, we really are, tapped into that big picture view and also what we believe in, especially emotionally believe in the situation. So all these really are factors. So Shawna, how do you think that moon is going to come into play and maybe some of that Chiron action?
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the moon making an aspect to Chiron, because Chiron, the term that comes to mind when you were saying that, Mel, is that our words can be used as medicine during this time, because Mercury is our words and our thoughts, our communication, and then Chiron, Chiron is associated with, woundedness, but it's also associated with healing and medicine. And it's kind of tricky because it's like, something that is a medicine, it really depends on the dosage. There is something that we could use to heal ourselves that could be healing. But if we have too much of it, if the dosage is too much, it can actually become a poison. And so I think the same also with Mercury and Scorpio is that, some words could be very healing, but then it's like, okay, does it become too much at any point? And I think that we're set up for success here because it is a harmonious aspect. It is Mercury trining to Neptune, and trines are typically supportive and they're more pleasant. So it does make me think, how are we going to take advantage of this to use our words as medicine, to use it as healing?
Yes, because that is what Chiron's function is. It does trigger that pain, but the whole purpose of the trigger is for the healing, right, Shawna? So if you feel triggered, it is really your go time, to, allow yourself to heal, especially, mentally, and how we envision it in our mind, because a lot of times that the healing has to start in our own heads and how we perceive things and what it is we believe about, it's the underlying beliefs, but that's what circles in our mind and that Mercury function as we go over and over and over, certain things in our head. So that's kind of why I find it very interesting that the moon is going to be conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius. So we will have to emotionally get on board with, what it is we believe in this situation to help our mind get us on the right page. Because it's all connected, right? So, you can't really have one without the other. You can't perceive things and, see the black and white issues and take it all in. If you believe something, that is always going to come in and give some type of filter on your mind. So I think that, now's the time to kind of really tap into those types of things. But, that is what's the word I'm looking for? That is a possibility of this transit. But there's other things that can come up, like when that Mercury trines that Neptune, it's, our imagination is lit up. So if you have if any of you artistic types or creative types out there, musicians, this is a good day. This is the days leading up to it and the day after, you might want to sit down with the muse, because chances are, you're going to be spoken to in some way or another. And then the same goes with meditation. This is a perfect time. And that can really tie into the whole Chiron thing and knowing how to honor, certain triggers that come up right now. And maybe that is by going in and meditating on what you're feeling. Because we're that much closer to spirit, when something trines, when something contacts Neptune. Well, especially in a harmonious aspect. So this could be a great time to really uplift your spirits through just, connection with yourself, and especially meditation, because you might download something that, is very healing. And that might be the way that energy comes in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mel. It's like Monday, Tuesday, even Wednesday are great days to allow for that kind of thing to come up, to take a long walk, to get some energy work, to spend an extra long session in meditation or journaling, or going for a swim or a run, or anything that just allows those that allows for daydreaming to happen can be very helpful during this time.
Yes. And that's the thing, is that we're daydreaming. So I find it very interesting with the moon conjunct Saturn, who Saturn is not a daydreamer. Saturn's like, okay, this is, this is what's real. This is what has to be attended to. This is our responsibilities that are in place, and I have to take, action on them. And so here the moon is conjunct with that energy. But our mind is basically like, I can't focus on anything practical right now. It's not very interesting to me. My mind is over wandering in these realms. And so chances are you might feel a little emotional around, something that is on your plate, or something that you have to do that is less of a Neptunian nature, but you don't have the focus necessarily to be able to put the energy into it. So if that happens for you, don't get too emotionally worked up, because your responsibilities will still be there tomorrow. But cause sometimes, since Neptune can have a little bit of a hazy, sometimes confusing quality to it, I wouldn't try to push ahead too hard on anything that's really practical, in this time period, just because it's really not the nature of Neptune. But also don't get down on yourself, because, whenever the moon conjuncts Saturn, it's a sobering moment in a sense, and especially around your big picture reality, because that's where, Sagittarius, and Saturn, we are looking at, that form around our big picture and our big vision. And so, yeah, so if you find yourself in that place, just know, like, rather than getting down and feeling you're not doing enough, or avoiding certain things, or thinking that, let's use this time to really envision what we can do with that big picture, and use those creative faculties rather than those analytical ones, where that might get down on you for not doing the more practical things of the day.
Yeah, I think that's wise advice, Mel, because with the moon and Saturn together, it's actually better if we don't get down on ourselves, because we have a lot of resources at this time, as far as our intuition and creative capabilities with the Mercury and Neptune there. It makes me think of, I was just yesterday reading this book about solitude and the benefits of solitude. And it talks about how our culture emphasizes that we always do something in order to be productive, that we think about things in a linear way, but that actually we can work out problems in a very efficient way when we do allow ourselves to pause, or to think abstractly, or to daydream a little bit. And so it feels like we may be feeling a little bit of that pressure from the Saturn and Moon together to work things out, but we may have additional resources as far as creative and intuition and just coming up with things that maybe are not so structured.
You know, I really like that, Shawna, because I'm like looking at the, you know, because this is happening at 11 degrees Scorpio and Pisces. And with Techie's system, 11 is, you know, I love some more. And so I become that. And I love the idea of becoming something in your own mind first, because that's the thing is we have to get on board, with, the vision of what we want to become, first and have that settled within our own, understanding, before we can really be that in the real world. So this could be a wonderful day to really, you know, daydream on that vision and intuit that vision and meditate on these visions. So that you can get your mind into, like a metamorphosis in a sense. So you can become this thing mentally, that maybe you haven't been yet. And now, you know, I mean, does that make sense, Shawna? Like the idea of like, kind of, you become something in your own mind and you grab onto that before you be it in real life. Because it's almost like if you put the cart before the horse, you know, there's going to be hiccups in your plans.
Yeah. And what you're talking about, Mel, is really, it's the path of manifestation, because when we manifest something, it comes as an intuition. It comes from above, you know, whether you call that from the divine or inspiration or the muse or whatever. The pathways, it starts, in the higher chakras, and then it moves down through your third eye, and then you think about it, you imagine it, and then it moves through your throat and you talk about it, and then it eventually moves down into the lower chakras, which are about the physical body. And so, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, you know, become it in your mind to heal it on the outside. So that being said, let's get in these tarot cards, because I feel like they might be a good segue from what we were just talking about. And so the cards that I drew for Mercury trine Neptune are the 7 of Swords as the focus and the Ace of Pentacles as the grounding. And it's just so interesting how the 7 of Swords seems to always sneak its way into our podcast. But really, I think that, this is centered around, a few things. You know, really it's about, this is a great time to go in and plan and, like schedule your dreams into tangible reality in a sense. And not so much like the Saturn, that we were talking about, like get it all on paper, but strategizing in the mind, like free form, you know, brainstorming, you know, what it is that we are trying to create in our lives, because the Ace of Pentacles is, you know, a new opportunity or a prosperous new beginning around something in the material realm or what it is we're trying to manifest. And the high side of that 7 of Swords, would be to, you know, have our own self-interest at heart enough to strategize something to bring it into, you know, creation in a sense. So Shawna, how do you see these two cards playing together?
Yeah, so when I first saw the 7 of Swords, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Me too.
So the 7 of Swords, it can go either way. It can indicate a certain level of slyness or sneakiness, but it can also, like you're saying, Mel, indicate where we're being strategic in order to execute something in a very skillful way. And then with the grounding being the Ace of Cups, that's like, that speaks to the creativity piece that you were talking about, Mel, where it's like, this is a great time to talk with the muse. And so I think with these, the trick is to be strategic, and then to watch out for any way in which we're deceiving ourselves, which is, you know, with Neptune, that's a possibility always, where we have like this amazing vision and it's going to be so cool. And then it kind of like gets blown out of proportion, and then we lose touch with what it is that we can actually do. And so I feel like that's more the deception piece with the Seven of Swords, where it's like, and that speaks to also like the moon and Saturn, like we were talking about, where, okay, we have this muse that's speaking to us, and then how can we ground that into reality? And we do that through the Ace of Cups, through like connecting with creativity and emotion. Oh, well, let me just,
I might have given you the wrong one, Shawna, but just so you know, it's the Ace of Pentacles as the grounding. So, but hey, that's fine, you know, if any
still
excuse to throw that cup in there. It's an ace, damn it. But the thing is that it still fits in because essentially we're talking about two water signs. So even though it's not there, what you were just saying still is very much applicable to this whole thing. And you know, if we're going to talk about kind of the shadow side, like you were just, tapping on a lot of the shadow side, aspects of that Seven of Swords, you know, the last thing I would add is maybe, if we're avoiding taking something beyond our first inclination right now, or like procrastinating on an opportunity that's coming our way, you know, because we just had Mercury conjunct, Jupiter last week. And we're about to talk about the Sun conjuncting Jupiter in our next segment. So there are opportunities on board this week. So just know if you're strategizing towards those things, or you're procrastinating and not taking action on those things and avoiding, something. So just know that if you have something on your plate and it has some promise to it, but there's little things about you that are kind of procrastinating or holding you back, or, you're not seeing things a certain way, or, you know, are confused about it, know that this is the start of something, and sometimes you just have to kind of grasp onto it and get your mind wrapped around it as best way possible, like that Seven of Swords, strategizing, and just being able to plan out these visions. Chances are you're going to be in a better place if you go that route. Like, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity at hand for a lot of people out there right now. And, you know, because I was just doing real quick before we move on, I was just doing a tarot event last weekend up in LA, and I was noticing a handful of people that came up to me that were talking about partnerships, and like business partnerships are being offered, like, you know, these new opportunities, especially with another person. And so many of them didn't know if they should take it. And I kept getting one after another, was like, yeah, one after another. And we'll talk about this in our next, I might be jumping the gun here for our next tarot card segment, but I just wanted to get that out there, that it seems like a lot of people have these opportunities on their plate right now, whether they're opportunities with someone else or, something else in their life. But, you know, it's good to weigh these things out, but also, you know, have that Neptunian, you know, kind of hope and faith around something, and just, go with the flow in a sense, because, there's some real opportunities out there right now for a lot of people, and you don't want to sidestep them, you know, out of fear or being confused about, you know, how it's going to look in the end run. 'Cause that's trust, my friend, and Scorpio is all about, trust. Either extreme trust or the lack of trust. And that might come up with this, Mercury, connection in Scorpio. So that being said, Shawna, here's a couple questions to take away for our trine to Neptune. You know, I would ask myself, what is my mind dreaming up? Is there opportunity there? Can I put it into form? I would ask, knowing that spirit is close at hand, can I take the time to create or meditate? And lastly, I would ask, if the need for empathy arises, will I recognize it? How can I express myself honestly and with charmed communication? So There are a couple ways that can go.
I love how can I meditate or create?
Yes. Because both of those things can be very fruitful right now if we allow ourselves to go down that path. Because not everybody is quite familiar with meditating or creating things, and it does have that open kind of vulnerability aspect that we are kind of featuring this week, right, Shawna, with our quotes.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. So yeah, let's move on to our next segment, which is a biggie, I think. And that is the sun, who has moved into Scorpio, and is conjuncting Jupiter, and what we are titling Your Greatest Potential. And so just for some exacts here, we have the sun, who has moved into Scorpio. It actually moved in last week on Sunday, October 22nd at 10:27 p.m. Pacific time, which is Monday, October 23rd at 5:27 a.m. Universal time, and then 3:27 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And we're going to have that sun, conjunction to Jupiter, on Thursday, October 26th at 11:10 a.m. Pacific time, which is 6:10 p.m. Universal time, and Friday, October 27th at 4:10 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that conjunction is going to happen at 3 degrees Scorpio. So Shawna, kick us in with your next quote.
So this is from Brainy Brown's book called Daring Greatly, and it's actually a section from what she calls the Daring Greatly Leadership Manifesto. We want to show up, we want to learn, and we want to inspire. We are hardwired for connection, curiosity, and engagement. We crave purpose, and we have a deep desire to create and contribute. And so I love this so much for this combination of the sun moving into Scorpio, but then also the sun connecting with Jupiter in Scorpio, because Scorpio, it is insatiably curious. And even though you wouldn't think Scorpio, oh yeah, like connection, there is this element of wanting to connect and wanting to make things meaningful, and like this deep desire to create and to contribute with Scorpio. And then when the sun connects with Jupiter, it just magnifies this even more. And there is a certain element of wanting to learn and wanting to inspire. And there's a generosity of the spirit when we have this together. So I thought this quote was really perfect to illustrate that.
Yes, I agree. And I love all the quotes this week, by the way, from her. I went down a rabbit hole with researching her, after you had proposed these quotes. And, she is just a fascinating character and someone I kind of relate to on several levels, with that. You really do have to look up her story, if anybody, or her video, real quick before we dive into this transit, Shawna. What is her TED Talk video? Do you remember the exact title? The Power of Vulnerability, or
I'm gonna look it up while we're talking.
Yeah.
You can look up, okay, so it's called, you can literally just Google TED Talk Brainy Brown. It's that, it went viral.
The first thing, yeah.
Yeah, the first thing that popped, but it is called, for those that are curious, it's, Brainy Brown, The Power of Vulnerability.
Yes. And yeah, it's like one of the most viewed TED Talks that there is. It has like 34 million views. It's crazy. And it's such a simple talk that she gave, but the story is great because it talks about a person who basically set out to try to, to find the finite specifics, that science aspect, that kind of scorpionic, like, let me investigate this to every single part and try to find exactly how this connects. But really what she was finding in connection, which is what she was looking at, was that she couldn't pinpoint it like that. You don't have that same type of control. And even though this might go better in our next segment that we're going to talk about, keep in mind that Scorpio is very much an energy that is focused on control in some way. It's funny how we try to manipulate things, towards, our own ability to control things. I mean, I'm not going to go into it much more than that, but I highly recommend watching. It's about a 20-minute video. And it is some good homework for this week, I would think. Especially since we have all this Scorpio energy, and that vulnerability of, Pluto that we're going to talk about in the next aspect. But let's get back to the fact that the sun is conjunct Jupiter. And Jupiter, whenever the sun conjuncts Jupiter, we start off a whole new cycle, right, Shawna? You know, this is a fresh new cycle. And it's a fresh new cycle of growth. So if you want to look back at, our conjunction, the, last conjunction, it's so funny that the last time the sun conjuncted, Jupiter was at 3 degrees Libra. That 3 is back. Exactly 30 degrees apart. And that happened on September 25th of 2016. So you can kind of use that date as a starting point to see your growth from last year, and track that type of, journey or passageway, to see how this might, rebirth. And sure, it's in a totally different sign. You know, we were starting a cycle that was essentially, growth around Libra issues. And now we're starting a cycle that is growth around Scorpio issues. So as Shawna was saying in the quote earlier, that deep desire, to, create and contribute and really, connect with other people, that is very much a Scorpionic type of thing, because Scorpio is really all about the connection, but not that surface connection. It's about deep connection. How can we go, in with ourselves and really connect, with ourselves on a cellular soul level? Or how can we connect with another where I can look in your eyes and I can see the deepness that lies within you just by a glance? This is what Scorpio, it brings to the table. So I feel like this cycle with Jupiter, and the sun, in its yearly conjunction is starting us, on a path of merging, into a deeper depth, not only within our own selves, but within our connection and relation to others. So Shawna, what do you think about that in the start of this cycle and kind of compared to the old cycle?
Yeah. So the previous cycle was Libra, right? So Sun and Jupiter connected in the sign of Libra. And it's really fascinating because Libra and Scorpio are both about relationships, but they're different kinds of relationships. Libra is around finding equanimity and finding balance, and it's more of the surface social connection. And it's more about, okay, how do I connect with you, but then stay connected to myself at the same time? And it's more of like the nuances in making sure that things are fair and that things are just at a more practical level. Like, do we split the bill, so to speak? Do you buy as much as I do and that kind of thing? Whereas Scorpio is like, I don't give a fuck about the bill. I want to feel our connection. Scorpio is, like you were saying, Mel, it is about power and control. And the teeter-totter with Scorpio is control in relationship, and how, are we controlling in a relationship or do we feel controlled, versus being vulnerable and open and receptive in relationship. And so Scorpio can do both. It can vacillate from like trying to have the upper hand, or to know that, like, a perfect example is if you're in relationship to someone, whether that's romantic or a friend, sometimes there's an imbalance where one person is more into someone than the other person. And so that's like a very Scorpionic, like, okay, who has the upper hand here? And then in contrast, the other side of Scorpio is where both people are open and they're more transparent. It makes them more vulnerable, but it also creates that deeper connection. And so this is like the being out for yourself versus being generous to others. And so I think a lot of those issues are going to come up this week as the sun moves into Scorpio, and then also as it gets highlighted by Jupiter, as it gets expanded on Jupiter. We're like, okay, how do we feel control or lack of control, and how do we stay open when we're in these deep relationships?
Yes, because, Shawna, we're talking about water here, and what does water like to do? It likes to merge.
Mm-hmm.
And Scorpio wants to merge. Let's merge. So that is definitely going to be an issue, that comes up, while Jupiter is in Scorpio and while the sun is in Scorpio. But let's talk about the fact that it's making its conjunction and becoming exact at a certain place and time, regardless that it's setting up a cycle for, that's basically happens, for the next year until November. We are still having this static, mundane moment of the conjunction of the sun and Jupiter. And so just some specifics here, when we have that conjunction, on Thursday, which is Friday, early Friday over, on the other side of the planet, we're going to have the moon in Capricorn, who's conjunct Pluto at the same time that we're having this conjunction. And so that's interesting. Especially since we're, with our next transit we're going to talk about, so this week is playing out rather, synchronistically, within all the themes here. So basically we're going to have the moon in Capricorn, conjunct Pluto. So our emotions are going to be on, some serious matters, in our lives, and especially, that Plutonian, scorpionic type of issues that we're just talking about, control and like breaking down things that no longer work in our lives so that we can bring in what is good. Because Jupiter is here to expand us in some way. And a lot of times, expansion is associated with the loss of something. And that's why, if you, are into astrology, you can see that a lot of times, Jupiter might be present in, charts of, in charts of death. And I'm not talking about, it could be proverbial death, but, I'm not saying anybody's going to go out and lose their life here. But what I'm saying is that, a lot of times in order for us to grow and to move on, to bigger and better things in our life, we also have to, take the wheat from the chaff and let go of certain things, and let things, lay to rest in a sense and have a peaceful ending or a peaceful death in a sense, proverbially speaking, so that we can go on into this new. So I think with the moon in Capricorn there conjunct Pluto, it might help us to release some of these certain things, because it is going to be triggering, that Venus in Libra, which we're going to talk about here in a second. And also, Uranus in Aries. So there's like this loose T-square going on between Venus, Uranus, and the moon, and Pluto, while we are basically having this great opportunity. So, it's interesting, Shawna. What do you think about all that kind of coming together and how opportunity might be born from, releasing something in a sense?
Yeah, I think this is such a good point, Mel. As I'm looking at it, it does emphasize this need to let go of one thing so that we can allow something else to come in. Because we only have so much time. We only have so much emotional, mental, and spiritual energy. And, maybe there is something that needs to be let go of, that needs to fall away. And, I would notice where it feels like we're still, like, in any situations that are coming up this week, where is it that we feel like we're still clinging onto it and holding it very tight? And maybe we need to relax the grip a little bit. And then, what falls away, it's meant to fall away so that something else new and fresh can come in. And, this may be behavior patterns. It may be a certain way of looking at a relationship or looking at the way that we do relationship. And it feels really important this week to let go of things that need to fall away, because we are starting this new cycle with Jupiter and the Jupiter and the Sun. And so it's like, what do we not want to take with us for the whole next year? Like, what baggage can be released that we don't want to hang on to? It's too heavy.
Exactly. And I don't want this to sound like a depressing thing, because I think that this is actually can be very healing. So just know that if you are, letting go of a certain aspect of something, and so you can embrace, your greatest potential, because essentially that's what we're talking about here. There's a lot of optimism, and awareness that comes when Jupiter conjuncts the Sun. And it was interesting because I was watching a program the other day. I can't remember what I was watching or what it was from. And they just flashed something on, and it was why we were having, Jupiter conjunct Mercury last week, and it flashed think change. And I was like, how perfect is that?
I love that.
Jupiter conjunct Mercury, which was last week, and now we have the Sun, and Mercury is still in Scorpio. So if you want a mantra right now, I would say think change is really something to think about. Think change, because that's there's so many humorous comedic bits I could do right now with that. But that's really what's going on here is we are ready for some change, and this is the start of a new cycle, and I think we're all really ready for it. And sometimes that can be scary in some ways, especially when we're changing and growing and expanding our horizons around certain scorpionic issues, because it's not always a walk in the park. But at the end of the day, that deep work that we do is incredibly healing and cleansing, and will really get us started on the foot that we need to be on, right? For a successful new beginning and to successfully, really tap into our greatest potential.
Yeah, I love that, Mel. I think this transit this week, it's why we're using Brainy Brown's work, because that's really the journey that she's gone through and that she teaches people. It's a lot about her letting go of control and, like letting that fixation on control die and fall away. And then what enters is what she calls being wholehearted. It's when you actually have a deeper connection with people because you've let go of that control. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's so perfect for her because she has Pluto right on her midheaven. Exactly. So here she is sharing with the world all these kind of Plutonian and Scorpionic ideas of, how to control, versus vulnerability. And it really is her lot, and what she is here to share. And she does it so well and in such a practical, relatable way that you're like, man, I relate to this. I'm like that too. So yeah, but overall, this is really a time to be focused on our big picture. And to get awareness around where we're growing, and to really tap into our confidence, and some optimism here, because that's what Jupiter, is known for, is that kind of optimistic bent, and how we can stay, positive around where we're going and see things on a grander scale rather than getting kind of mired down with the specific muck, in a sense. So to basically enlarge our Scorpio picture here, the Sun is allowing us to shine a light around all these Scorpio issues, to really understand them for our growth, and for the future. So I would look at wherever Scorpio, is in your chart to see where you're having this new beginning. Where are you starting fresh in this cycle? Where is your own big picture expanding right now? And that can give you, some information around where this growth for the next year is for you. And if you don't know these things, that's what Shawna and I are here for. So please reach out, And we can help for those things.
Yep.
So that being said, let's talk about these tarot cards because I think they're very interesting, as well. So I drew for the Sun conjunct Jupiter in Scorpio, I drew the Two of Cups as the focus and the Two of Pentacles as the grounding. And I have to say, Shawna, how interesting is it that I got two twos? And especially since I was just talking with my, earlier, a few minutes ago in the episode before we got to this transit about the people that I was encountering at the tarot event and all these opportunities for partnership. And so I really feel that there is a merging here. There's a change, around, who it is we're connecting with. Or we might need to open up to a connection, either a work or a business partnership in some way. Or if we're trying to really find the balance in our relationships to live our life, more harmoniously, we might need to focus on, being adaptable and going with the flow. Cause that's the thing with the Two of Pentacles is that it's all about change. It's all about balance. It's all about being flexible and juggling something. So chances are you might be, juggling your relationship in a sense, or you might need to be more adaptable about getting into a heart-based connection, so that you can merge your resources together, and focus on an endeavor. Because ultimately, when the twos come up, we are essentially, choosing to say yes to something or deciding upon something. So I feel like this conjunction is really going to give us like a fresh start. There we go. We're choosing to say yes to the start. So yeah, Shawna, how do you see, these two twos, cups and pentacles really coming into play?
Yeah, it's interesting. The sense I get from this is very much like you're saying, Mel, we're navigating through a relationship and this might even be like working out, okay, like how much do I share or how much do I put myself out there? Because when it comes down to the Two of Pentacles, the Pentacles are our resources, and that's not just money, but it's emotional effort and time, and it's our attention. So like how do we give our attention? What does that look like? How do we find a way to find balance? And that could be practical things like time management, but it can also just be like how well do you communicate with a person, with your partnerships about what it is that's happening. And so, it feels like we're like in the thick of juggling all of those things.
Yeah, I agree. Cause the chances are our partnerships and who we're, merging with is going through some change right now. So just open up to that change and who you're connecting with, because ultimately the focus is on the Two of Cups, and that is the merging, that is the partnership, that's the connection. We want to focus on these things, because that is the most important. And even though they're not grounded, in a very solid way right now, this is the beginning of this merging, and we have to give it some time and remain flexible. So I think, I don't know about you, Shawna, but I think there's some really good things that are going to happen out of this cycle, and especially in relation to our connection with others.
I agree.
Yes, or at least let's hope. So some questions to take away for Jupiter conjuncting, the Sun conjuncting Jupiter. I would ask, with the start of this fresh cycle, can I take the time to understand the last year's growth while looking ahead to the next with optimism for the future? I would ask, is there an opportunity in my partnerships? Are there shared resources we can merge together for dual benefit? And then lastly, I would ask, how confident am I regarding change? Can I focus on the big picture and journey towards my greatest potential? Because that's the question here. Can we journey to our greatest potential? All right, so let's move on to our final pair of aspects here that we have, which is we have Mercury, who is in Scorpio, as we well know, and is going to be in a sextile aspect to Pluto in Capricorn. And we also have Venus in Libra, who's going to be squaring Pluto in Capricorn, and what we are calling discovering deep connections. And just some specifics here. We have, Mercury, who's going to sextile Pluto on Friday, October 27th at 8:22 p.m. Pacific time, which is Saturday, October 28th at 3:22 a.m. Universal time, and at 1:22 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 17 degrees Scorpio and Capricorn. Then, moments before, we're going to have Venus square Pluto, exactly on Friday the 27th at 8:19 p.m. Pacific time, which is Saturday the 28th at 3:19 a.m. Universal time and 1:19 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that is at 17 degrees Libra and Capricorn, which is crazy because it's only 3 minutes apart. And then, lastly, we're going to throw in our first quarter moon, which is going to happen on Friday, October 27th at 3:22 p.m. Pacific time, which is 10:22 p.m. Universal time, and Saturday the 28th at 8:22 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 4 degrees Aquarius. So Shawna, kick us in with your last quote.
So this quote is also from Daring Greatly. We love seeing raw truth and openness in other people, but we're afraid to let them see it in us. Here's the crux of the struggle. I want to experience your vulnerability, but I don't want to be vulnerable myself. Vulnerability is courage in you, but it's inadequacy in me. I'm drawn to your vulnerability, but repelled by mine. And so I feel like this is such an important quote within the context of her entire work because it really hits on, it hits on a core issue around vulnerability and connection. And what better quote than when we're talking about Venus in Libra, which is all about connection and relationships, squaring Pluto, which is about shame, vulnerability, but also intimacy and empathy. And then also Mercury in Scorpio, sextiling Pluto. So it's like all of these things around how it is that we're vulnerable, how it is that we show up for other people, and how much of that has to really do with our own capacity to be okay with when it is that we feel uncomfortable. And I feel like that really informs the nature of our relationships. And those are all things that will come up this week, and how it is that we can be comfortable being uncomfortable with another.
And I have to say, Shawna, that this quote might get my award for best quote you've ever shared on this podcast, because I have to say, and it might just be me because I resonate with it. But there's so much truth in what she says there. So much truth. And it really has to be honored and understood what she is essentially saying. Because that's the emotional trick that happens. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to, show where our weakness is, because where our weakness is where someone could strike and take us down. But the reality is that any type of connection that happens, or any type of merging or understanding or healing, has to have an element of vulnerability to it, so that we can open up to the real issue, and then heal it. Because if we sidestep it constantly and we just don't allow ourselves to be that vulnerable person, the work is never going to be done, especially within relationships. So this is something really to think about, especially this week with Venus squaring Pluto, and the fact that we have Mercury, who is in a sextile aspect where it wants to work with Pluto. It wants to communicate these Plutonian issues, and hopefully be able to transmute them into some healing around these issues of vulnerability. So yeah. So yes, wonderful quote, I have to say, and it really opened my eyes in certain ways personally. So I thank you for sharing.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense because to me, this is a classic Plutonian quote. It's the essence of Pluto. It reminds me of the astrologer Stephen Forrest in one of his books. He talks about the teacher and the trickster side of each planet. And when he's talking about Pluto, he talks about Pluto's the trickster, like where it kind of like will get you tripped up, is that it's about like protecting oneself and thinking that basically that I'm broken and that I need to like hide because I'm inadequate. And it's crazy because like that's so not the case. And we're drawn like vulnerability, and when people are flawed, it actually humanizes them, and it actually like draws us to them because we're like, oh, you're imperfect, but that makes you like endearing and beautiful and special and all of these things. And so yeah, I think like her work in this quote is really nice for a Pluto transit, and then anyone that has a lot of Pluto in their chart as well too. It can be very, very healing to contemplate.
Yes. And maybe that's why this meant so much to me, because, I have, Pluto in a T-square exactly with my sun and my moon. So I understand these issues, and especially as a Scorpio rising. So I really resonate with those things. So that being said, I find it very interesting that these aspects are within 3 minutes of each other. So if these things are paired together like a package piece here, and meant to be worked together in a sense. And I also find it interesting that we are basically building up with our first quarter moon tension there in Aquarius. And the moon will have just been in a trine aspect to Mars. It's going to be obviously square the sun and square Jupiter. So that emotional faculty is in a very sensitive place. And I think that might be part of the tension that we're feeling that leads to some of these incidences where we might have to reach out to another person and say our piece, or because the reality is that relationships are probably going to be a little tough right now with Venus square Pluto. Chances are someone might upset you, or you might upset another person, or you might be upset about something. That first quarter moon is really tapping into that tension. It's amplifying it emotionally in a sense. So, Shawna, how do you see the fact that these are so close together in aspect, and how they're basically riding each other's coattails? And B, how that first quarter moon, and especially that Aquarius energy, might have an impact in these transits.
Yeah, so it does feel like it's a potential for triggers, for people to be triggered, for someone to trigger you, or for you to trigger someone else. And so I think that's good to pay attention to. And the more that we can notice where it is that we have like a strong emotional reaction to something, it's like, oh, okay, not like, the more space that we can create around that, the better, because whatever is coming up right now is something that is meant to be processed and to be worked through, and ultimately that's meant for healing, because Pluto, it will sometimes indicate that a trigger around something that's very emotional will come up, but then we can work with that and look at it and understand what's really going on underneath the surface, and then we can be that much stronger afterwards. I think with the moon being in the sign of Aquarius, that can be like a resource, but also something to watch too, because Aquarius is more emotionally detached, and so I'm wondering if we may have an ability to reason and to have that space around our feelings, so that we're not so that we're responding versus reacting. But at the same time, Aquarius, the shadow side of Aquarius is disengaging and saying, you know, I don't want to deal with this. This is too traumatic. And so I'm going to shut down in a certain respect. And so, I would watch for that. I would watch for where it is that, like I would temper, you know, how do we stay connected through the process of being triggered, and how do we work through that in a way that is always conscious and always staying connected to our feelings.
I think that's a very excellent point, Shawna, because that is true. Aquarius can detach and logically rationalize certain things, and especially with the emotions, that's not always the best response, especially to move past something and heal something. And especially with Venus, who is in Libra, where she likes to be. She loves to be in Libra. So that part's great. But she's just so giving and affable that, you know, some conflict, can be a little, hard for, a Venus in Libra, if we're at that point. So the combination of the Aquarius not wanting to look at it and logically rationalizing everything, mixed with the, I don't want to kick up any, dirt here. I don't want to cause any friction. That's where you might get a little tripped up, because chances are the positive step forward, is going to cause some friction, and you can't really avoid, you know, that particular constructive conflict. However, you can avoid the unnecessary conflict. And I think that is the thing to really tap into with this Mercury sextile Pluto, is us really, being able to discern what is a constructive conflict and airing our piece for healing, and what is a destructive, conflict. Because, yeah, we're having help from Mercury sextile Pluto, which means there's an opportunity there, essentially, you know, and we're stimulated into action. However, that opportunity that is just free flowing is combined with a one that is not so free flowing. So just, you know, because Scorpio is known to say the thing that just goes straight to the heart, you know? You don't even mean it, or you do mean it, or you don't even realize what you're saying is like the death blow. But just know, speaking from experience as a Scorpio rising, sometimes I have said things to people that, yeah, maybe I was trying to get under their skin a little bit, but it just takes it to the next level. And you just gotta know when the conflict is constructive and when it's destructive. Because essentially I think there is going to be something that comes up this time that is, you know, either asking us to stand up for ourselves, you know, especially with Venus in Libra, who's easily, kind of like, oh, I'll just do whatever for anybody else. And so that might be part of it, right now. But ultimately, if we just express ourselves honestly, which is essentially what Pluto wants, you know, rather than waiting on something, procrastinating something, or trying to walk away from something, we're just going to have to deal with it in a sense. So Shawna, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it makes me think of one term that Brainy Brown uses. I don't think this is in the TED Talk video. I think this is in maybe some other videos that she shared, but she talks about what she calls marble jar friends. And this is all around, you know, what is a constructive vulnerability and being empathetic versus something that is not healthy, not a healthy conflict, not a healthy vulnerability. And she relates this to trust. And there was a conversation that she was having with her daughter where in her daughter's classroom, the teacher has this big jar, and anytime that the class does something good, she puts a marble in the jar. Anytime the class does something bad, she takes a marble out of the jar. And once the jar is filled up, then they get like a pizza party or something. And so they were talking about trust and friendship and that kind of thing. And she was talking to her daughter about how there are some people in your life where they've been putting marbles in the jar. They've been building trust with you over time, one little bit by one little bit. And then sometimes things happen where we have a relationship with someone and they're taking marbles out of the jar. And that's like those cutting comments, you know, and that kind of thing, or there's lack of trust. And so I think that's like a nice analogy to keep in mind as all of these issues around vulnerability are coming up, because sometimes, and Brainy Brown talks about this a lot, sometimes we can be very open to vulnerability, but the person on the other end, maybe they're not capable of working through that with us. And so I think it's so important, because I know that a lot of people that listen to this podcast, I know some of you guys are super sensitive and like deeply, deeply feeling people, but that doesn't always mean that everyone else is capable of receiving that. And so I think that's something good to keep in mind too, is like, you know, where, like, how do we share ourselves with people that deserve us, and, you know, deciphering that and discerning all of that information.
That is an excellent point, Shawna, because that's true. You know, when you're someone like us, and, you know, and our listeners, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably like us. And we are these, you know, sensitive creatures, that want to better ourselves and be more vulnerable in the world so that we can grow. And like Shawna was saying, not everyone is like that, and you can't force someone to be. And that is the thing, exactly. With Pluto. And this is another lesson to take from, Venus, especially square Pluto, is that you can't interfere in someone else's lesson. Essentially. So if someone's going through some things and you can't change them, and they're not open to your vulnerability, and vice versa, they have their own lesson to learn here. And that is not your problem to fix. You've done what you can, and you have to honor that. And then sometimes the best thing to do is just to, you know, let something go that is, for the best for you. And essentially for the best for them, because they're going to learn that lesson some way later down the road. And even if they don't, that is not your cross to bear. It is theirs. So that's the thing that can be hard, especially when you're empathetic like we are, you know, and able to see those sensitivities, in other people. We think that we can change others. And the reality is, we can help in that process if they're open. But if they're not, then that's just not, our role. And we have to honor that. So, that being said, you know, look out, because chances are there's going to be some, you know, the mind is sharp. You're ready to make certain decisions about your life. We just had the sun conjunct Jupiter. We are thinking about the future. We are ready to move forward. And this is the time when we can really have those conversations, with others in our life, to, share these deep, deep things. So that being said, let's talk about these tarot cards, because I feel like it reinforces what we're saying and adds like a slightly, additional, layer to it all. And so I just did 2 cards for both of these transits together, or well, actually including the first quarter moon, because that's part of it. And so this combo, it gave me the 4 of Cups as the focus and Temperance as the grounding. And there is, you know, 4 of Cups is really centered around reevaluation, and being discontent with something, or feeling bored about something, or just feeling stuck emotionally. So this is a great time to really look into, what is working and what isn't. You know, do you need to have more patience with something? Because sometimes that's the case, and we get discontent around not having enough patience in a situation. But ultimately, we want to tap into what is causing that discontent so that we can balance ourselves, on the material and the spiritual plane. So chances are there's going to be a little introspection, quality going on here. So Shawna, what do you think about these 2 cards put together?
Yeah, this to me speaks of finding that balance between working through our own internal stuff, how it is that we're triggered, and then, okay, what's actually happening from a more objective standpoint, and how can we figure out how to respond in a way that honors our intuition and our feelings, and that also honors the people in our lives as well. And I think especially the temperance really speaks to that. It's like, okay, how can we have the broader picture in mind and slow things down a little bit? Maybe do some journaling or talk to a friend or talk to a counselor, to get a more, to get a little more balance around how it is that we respond. And there's no need to rush. I feel it is more about just like paying attention and being very clear on why it is that we feel the way that we feel and taking responsibility for that.
Yes, I agree there. And it's interesting because we haven't talked about this so much, and because of it's the Four of Cups, chances are we might be creating emotional boundaries for our own necessary balance and flow. Because that's another thing with Pluto, and the fact that we have this first quarter moon. Venus is squaring it. We're able to kind of talk about these issues with that sextile to Mercury. Like, this might be the time to really lay down where your emotional boundaries are with another person, or even within yourself, so you understand where that line is drawn. Because we need boundaries in order to have, that balance and flow in life. Because if everything is all loosey-goosey and willy-nilly, we can have these little things slip in, and there's just no defining, boundaries around what it is that you will and will not accept, and especially emotionally. So the fact that we're at this first quarter moon, and it's really time to take action on something, and push through, with this, Scorpio cycle that we're in, chances are, and I mean, maybe that's where that Aquarius detachment could come in a little bit and help in the matter. Is it's like, okay, well, the reality is that I have to have some boundaries in place because, I'm not really happy with how it is right now, and I'm a little not discontent with the picture. So how can I, get my needs out there and lay down some foundation around what that actually is? So we might be creating some emotional boundaries right now, which is a healthy thing to do.
Definitely.
So that being said, just a couple questions to walk away, from Mercury sextiling Pluto, as well as Venus squaring Pluto, and that first quarter moon, all this action at once. I would ask myself, with relationships a little tough right now, can I take this time to reevaluate what I truly want? Will honoring those realizations bring about more balance and harmony? I would ask, if the time is right to have a deep connection with another, will I say what needs to be said? Will I listen to what needs to be heard? And then lastly, I would ask, where do I need to communicate my emotional boundaries to another person or situation? How can I be sharp and decisive, yet respectful and honest?
I love those, Mel. Those are great reflection questions.
So let's reflect. oh my gosh, Shawna, what have we learned this week? We've learned that all the things. We've learned that Mercury in Scorpio is going to trine Neptune, leading us to some charmed communication, I hope, and our intuitive faculties and our creative faculties and our ability to meditate will be on fleek, as they say. And then we basically have the sun in Scorpio conjunct Jupiter. We're really lining ourselves up for our greatest potential, which sometimes, asks for us to, release from our life so that we can go forward, from a healed place. And then we also learned that Mercury, is going to sextile Pluto and Venus is going to square Pluto. And we're going to have a first quarter moon all at the same time. And so we are discovering our deep connection with others and how we play a role within that and what our vulnerability looks like and how well we are able to communicate that to others. So Shawna, sounds like a rather intense week, but one that is going to be rewarding in the long term. So I know you have an excellent action item for our listeners to take part in, so please share.
Yes. So this week's action item is to watch the TED Talk by Brainy Brown.
So funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's because it's amazing. And if you have already watched it, watch it again or she has a bunch of other TED Talks, but I really like this one. It was originally, she spoke in, I think it's June 2010. And so if you just Google Brainy Brown TED Talk, the power of vulnerability is the topic. It's 20 minutes long and it's really amazing and it's really cool. You get to hear a little bit about her and her story as well and how she came to this work. And then extra homework, a book that came to mind as we're talking about all of these Pluto things that's a good resource is, it's a classic book. It's called, Codependent No More. And, it's a great book on I thought of it, Mel, when you were talking about setting emotional boundaries. And so this is a great book, even if a person doesn't identify as being codependent, it really helps to separate, to like draw those clear boundaries and to let other people live their lives so that we can live our lives. And so, it's like a #1 bestseller. It's sold millions of copies. It's really popular. So it's, called Codependent No More. And it's by Melody Beattie. So that's a good read for anyone that is working through relationship stuff this week as well. And so another way to get involved is to get connected with us on Facebook and Instagram. We always love hearing from you, sharing how it is that you listen to the podcast. You can comment or tag us under Feminine Principle Podcast. And then, of course, you can become a patron of the podcast to show your appreciation and to get the show notes that we prepare every week. And then one last way to get involved, so many resources for you all. Just a reminder that we are hosting that full moon Facebook Live event. So that will be Friday, November 3rd at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, which is 7:30 p.m. Universal time. And then over in Australia, it's actually on Friday the 4th at 5:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Time.
Yes, for our early risers or late to bedders.
Yeah.
Yes, and so you can find us, like we were saying earlier, Facebook at Feminine Principle Podcast, and same as Instagram, where we'd love to share. Or hear what you would have to share for, this week and what's going on. So please, tag us, and let us know what's going on with you, at our dual, our shared, presence online. But that being said, where can you reach us if, you want to reach out to either Shawna or I? Well, you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Energetic Principles. So, Shawna, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Neo Feminine Astrology.
Yes, so we are out there, and we are ready to connect with you and see what's going on. So that being said, Shawna, any last words for our listeners?
Yeah, sending lots of love and asking that if you enjoy this podcast, if you like listening to us every week, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. That helps us to reach more people. It helps us to get our more visibility. And then, of course, make sure that you're subscribed so that you get future episodes the moment that they are uploaded.
Yes. And just as a reminder, they are uploaded at midnight on Sundays, Pacific time, to get you ready for the week. So we definitely appreciate everybody, listening, and we can't thank you enough. So that being said, I'm wishing you a wonderful week. And we thank you so much for tuning in. So until next time, may the stars be with you.
Namaste.